Well, hello and welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Jeff Baumgartner, a senior editor at Light Reading.
And I'm Brian Comiskey, senior director and futurist at the Consumer Technology Association.
Hey, Brian, good to connect with you again. It's been about a year, I think, since the last time we talked.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like I feel like a few things have happened since in the year since we talked, but tremendous time for innovation for sure.
Yeah. So I appreciate you joining the podcast. Where we're connecting to discuss CES 2025, which is just around the corner, and to get a preview of sorts before the tech world converges on Las Vegas once again. So I thought, just to kick things off, we can just start big picture and to get a sense from you on what do you expect to be the top trends at CES 25. I took a look at the agenda and some of what's already on the site about, it's a lot going on at the show, but I do see a lot of information and content that's going to be focused on areas like AI, gaming, health, cybersecurity, sustainability, digital health, pretty wide set of areas, but, technology kind of connects them all. So again, a lot going on, but if you had to boil it down, what are going to be the big things at the 2025 event?
Yeah, well, to your point, there are a ton of different technology areas that appear at our show. And that's really why, if you ask what the core theme of the show is, the phrase we're using is dive in. And I think that's a really good picture of it, because it's about building on some of the technology trends that we've seen in the previous shows and going in further on how that innovation can really impact people. And so when we think about what the top trends look like in that dive in space, I don't think it was a surprise. Artificial intelligence is going to be a major theme of the show. And it's really just this reflection of just how much that technology already underpins a lot of digital health devices, a lot of different entertainment devices today. But how does it go further and build on some of the on-device advancements we saw last year, some of the chip advancements that have come over the last year or so, especially, and how does that become better software and more intuitive, personalized features? So that's AI. Digital health really is what I think is exciting about this show is most of those exhibitors historically have been in the Las Vegas Convention Center campus in one of the halls over there. It's actually moving to our Venetian campus on the show. And this is really reflective of how it's going to be alongside smart home, fitness tech, sleep tech, food tech. And it's really reflective of, if you look at all the devices and the products and the features in digital health, they interact every day, whether it's passing the data that you want passed to another device, whether it's a food intake, caloric measure, or passing it to your wearable. A lot of this data interacts every day, and it's about how does that leverage into something like longevity, where it's about longer, healthier, and better living. And of course, sustainability is a major focus. We actually will even have a new track at the show in terms of conference sessions, as well as a category called energy transition. And a lot of that is reflective to the advances we've seen in AI, compute, cloud, and other, to be honest, data center and power intensive technologies require us to look at, well, how do we continue to innovate sustainably and ensure that we also have clean power sources that can power this AI revolution we're going into? So really all of it connects back to one at the end of the day about how does it improve people's lives? How does it improve people's function in enterprise or as consumers? And how do we do it all sustainably?
Yeah, and it feels like connectivity kind of underpins everything, but we're starting to see AI. Granted, I think in recent years it's been, it's kind of been a lot of interest and hype around AI, but we are seeing it applied in a lot of ways now. And then when you're talking about sustainability, I think that's really interesting on the connectivity into that on AI, because AI is very processing intensive, and there's a lot of ways that needs to be handled, from a sustainability standpoint. And I think in the past you've had sustainability sessions and things like that, but is this the first time it's you've really had it as a core focus, or is it just kind of building on what you've been doing in recent years?
So sustainability has been the show for years, and I think that it's important to distinguish that this new conference track around energy transition is also reflect another story that has emerged in clear focus. But we've had incredible sustainable innovation from whether it's your legacy giants like your LGs, your Samsungs, and Sonys. In the past, they'll be back with more sustainable innovation. We expect Panasonic, who's going to be a keynote speaker, to talk a lot about their sustainable efforts. You have companies like Exeger that do a great job of building flexible solar cells into consumer electronic devices. That's a traditional sustainability story. But with energy transition, it's also highlighting some of the companies that maybe it's not about solar powering a consumer electronic or reducing the energy footprint of your smart home device. We're talking solutions more like Eaton, who will be at the show floor, doing around a data center cooling. And so 40 to 60% of the emissions from a data center actually just comes from cooling the locations. And so innovation there really is talking about sustainability from an energy standpoint in a new way. And we'll even see companies like Ineos from Japan. They're actually Japan's largest oil company. They're coming to talk about renewables and how they fit into the energy transition story. So I think it's just a new chapter of a story that CES has done quite well over the years. It's just there's now, I think AI has surfaced a new element and of a consciousness around, well, how do we power these incredible tools that businesses are coming to rely on and consumers are starting, whether they realize or not, have been using for years. It's the majority of your content recommendations. It's underpinning most of your fitness wearables and how they get that personalized data for you. And so if that's becoming table stakes to daily life as we know it, we have to make sure that we're powering it in a way that meets a lot of the international regulatory agreements that companies had. CES is a global show, remember, so there are global agreements people focus on, and a lot of companies have made private and personal commitments to hitting net zero by 2030 or 2040. So energy transition becomes very much in focus, where we have a very power intensive environment right now, and there's no reason we can't do it all.
Okay, great. Yeah, hopefully I can get a chance to see some of the advancements that are kind of going on in that area, because yes, it's definitely a big topic in our world. Not just AI, but it's the other ways that you can be more sustainable because of the processing and the power it takes to enable it. And then in the past, we've seen the show like years ago, focus on 5G when it was still in its infancy. It was like way ahead of actual deployments, and there's a lot of talk about, hey, 5G is on the horizon. Here's what we think it's going to enable. And these days, there's a lot of chatter and work underway for 6G, right? And so I haven't had a chance to look through the every detail of the agenda, but if you were to take a look, are there any plans or expectations for content or sessions that's focused on that emerging standard?
Yeah, certainly. I think a best way to even bucket is, and we still use the 5G technologies designation because that's where a lot of the innovation is still occurring. You'll see companies like MediaTek that are there. You'll see how even on the data infrastructure side, a company like Marvell Technology and others will be on the show floor talking about some of their 5G technologies right now, and there'll be conference track sessions to it. To the point about 6G, I'm certain that there will be discussions of that standard on stage, as well as certainly some innovations that will appear there. And I think a really good way to even frame it is, we say 5G, we say 6G. I think it's becoming really clear that we should probably start using the phrase NextG. That's one that I prefer because really it reflects how iterative the connectivity story is and the process is. These standards are constantly in motion. If you ask me, someone has said, what does CES 2050 look like? And I'm like, well, I would hope it would be like zero latency and we're on 9G at that point. That really allows for just continuous
pure real time, something like
pure
that.
real time. And so it'll be interesting to see, there's companies that are, that are building around that in terms of connectivity side. And then there's even some energy companies that are trying to build for that future too, and build the architecture and infrastructure. I know there's a startup out of Korea that's focusing on AI 6G infrastructure built around their battery technology. And I think that's fascinating, where everyone is thinking about, okay, we're building for the moment, whether that's 5G or another technology that's improving lives today, but you're already seeing companies make either statements through their descriptions or some of the products that they're hinting or teasing at this point, saying, we're also thinking about how do we future-proof this to a degree. And as a futurist, I think that's the stuff that really gets me excited, is like seeing who's planning not just for the now, but playing this very good long game from an innovation standpoint.
Okay. And timing being what it is, right? We're going to be, it's going to be January 2025, and, we're going to have a new administration on the way in. So I just wanted a quick question to you about maybe some of the political intrigue as we head into the 2025 event. With the new administration, there's been a lot of chatter about tariffs, and obviously that can impact a lot of companies in general, but CE companies for sure. So I know you're not the policy person at CTA, but I imagine it's going to be part of the discussion or a lot of the chatter there. But any specific thoughts about tariffs on this part of the industry heading into the show?
Yeah, of course. And I think this is the most as I said, I'm not a policy person, but it's something that I think impacts us all. And as in the research side, and I oversee a partnership that we do with NASDAQ on creating thematic stock indexes around technology trades. Tariffs are a significant headwind in a lot of ways. But let's start with really, I think, why it's in major focus. When you think about it from the consumer standpoint, that's a tax that goes right to the consumer. They're paying for that out of pocket, versus it's not a tax on the country that's bringing it in. And there's already some research that's showcasing what that impact would look like. If you have a 10 to 20% across the board tariff, and then a 60 to 110% tariff on Chinese imports that have, these are figures that have been thrown out, because I will say clearly, even as I'm giving an answer here, anyone who says that they know exactly what's going to happen in January and with the policy changes right now, they might be trying to sell you something. But I think in this case, what does the research say if something happens? And we've heard some of these numbers: 10 to 20% across board tariff, 60 to 100% tariff on Chinese imports. That would dramatically increase household expenses. There's already research from the budget lab at Yale that shows that annual costs for a household would rise up $7,600 alone. And then that's pretty massive when you think about it. And you look at what that comes into prices rising. There's appliances would go up about 31%. And so when you think about what that inflationary impact looks like, that would be consumer prices expected to rise by 1.4 to even as much as 5.1%. And that would then in turn account for 10 to 33% of post-pandemic inflation. That's just from that shift in policy. So we look at it as it's a tax on the consumers in terms of household prices just go up as a reflection of that. And it's not just China. There's the impact that could be felt with Canada and Mexico, who are major trading partners. We imported from these key partners about $132 billion in tech products. So when you think in these figures, that it's a very real area of concern. And so it's something that we'll certainly watch closely in the coming months to see, do some of these policies get enacted? But it's something that industry, and whether they're in the policy side or the research side, are going to watch very closely.
Yeah. And I think if I was to think back to like the 2016 timeframe, and the tariffs were also a big topic back then, and I think CTA was really keeping tabs and being pretty vocal about it at that time. So yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye out as things progress in 2025 and how these potential tariffs might impact that part of the industry. So I appreciate your thoughts there. And then the show itself, right? It's pretty vast. Like when I go, I'm popping all over the strip, going from Mandalay Bay and Aria and areas there, and then going down to the West Hall and everywhere in between is kind of where companies and meetings are that fit into my wheelhouse. But as we head into this year's show, is there anything, you mentioned some movement to different venues, but is there anything new or different about this year's event that you'd want to make note of?
Yeah, well, I think part of that move that we've talked about around digital health going into the Venetian campus is a reflection of, the show is it's hitting around like 2.5 million net square feet of exhibit space across Las Vegas. That's a huge reason why Las Vegas is a great place to show, because they have the infrastructure and the spaces. So I mentioned this word campus. That's a newer term that we're using to really describe that there's going to be three main areas at the show to go to. And the first is the Las Vegas Convention Center campus, the traditional one where we'll have Central, North Hall, and West Hall. South Hall will actually be back online for the first time since CES 2020. And that will be a lot of the design and source materials and a lot of the accessories that come through the entire supply chain of the tech ecosystem. So excited to see about that. And when you think design and source, I think historically people, look at and they think that it's just out of China, but we'll see India as well as the Philippines bringing a presence there as well. So that's the first campus. And I should be quickly say with Las Vegas Convention Center, you'll see a lot of mobility in West Hall. So the automotive and really advanced vehicle tech stories there. North Hall is like tomorrow's work. So a lot of enterprise tech alongside sustainability, energy transition, smart homes. And Central Hall is where you would see the legacy of those consumer electronics brands, your LGs, your Samsungs, video and audio. That's one campus. The other is, second one is the Venetian campus. And this is where there's digital health being alongside food tech, sleep tech, fitness, and more, as well as smart home. And then below on one level below on the floor is Eureka Park, which is our startup space where there's usually well over 1,000 exhibitors there, oftentimes from the US as well as country pavilions. It's one of my favorite parts of the show floor. I can never pick a favorite. It's like picking my favorite cat, impossible to do. But it's an incredible experience to be on that show floor on that space. So that's the second campus. And the final one is our C Space campus. So this is over at the Aria and Vidara, the Cosmo. These are really where it's our, you would say content marketers, but I would say it's about culture, and it's a lot of the entertainment, the content, advertising, as well as even travel and other cultural impacts of how technology builds how we entertain ourselves, how we move through and interact as society. So I think all three have, while very different experiences, it all is interconnected at the end of the day, where it's these three major campuses where technology is really about shaping the communities that we live in, and how does it improve people's lives.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that the South Hall had been unavailable, for that long. I just I never had any meetings over there. I never really thought about, whether it was actually active, the last few years. So that's interesting. Okay. And then one thing I wanted to ask you a little bit about is the expectation on the size of the show, the crowds, exhibitors. I was looking at the results from the 2024 event, and I think it was more than 4,300 exhibitors, a record 1,400 plus startups. You had mentioned the 2.5 million plus net square feet of exhibits. And then all in all, I think the 2024 show was like 15% bigger than the 2023 show. So I know, things are still being put together here, but, is there any forecasts or predictions at this point on what 2025 show going to end up at?
Well, I think we're seeing great momentum here, where we already know that CES is up in registration, hotel rooms, and we even saw a record number of innovation award submissions and honors from that, and as well as record number of speaker submissions. So we know that the momentum's there, that there's a lot of excitement building towards the show, because at the end of the day, CES is where business is done. So all these industry leaders and decision makers are coming together, and we expect more than a third of our attendees to be at the VP level of above. The average exec will probably hold about 29 meetings at CES. So we know that the excitement and the momentum's building to it. I will say we will give official numbers once our independent audit comes in after the show, because I think that's a really important. We think that's a really important part of this process, is having this independent voice come back and say, "Hey, here are the numbers and what we expect at it." So for now, the show is still, even though we're only a few weeks out at this point, the show is still shaping up, and we're bringing more and more people online. And I think that excitement and that momentum is building, and so I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in Vegas and then seeing the numbers when that audit comes back.
Okay. And when you look at the numbers that we did have for 2024 show, are we in effect back to pre-COVID levels, or are we past those levels, or still, where was it getting close to those levels? Kind of how would it compare? In the 2024 versus 20, before the
2020 actually,
yeah, we actually were there.
Yeah, so 2020 was my first, and I think I can kind of say from experience, last year's show felt very similar to 2020 in a lot of ways from an experiential standpoint. It was packed, crowded booths. I think too, like, it's some of the lessons that you learn from having to pivot during a thing like that is, the booth, the kind of the exhibit spaces are like a little bit wider. And so I think we've done a good job with that. So from an experiential standpoint, it feels like we're back. And I think it's making sure that our content, and whether it's speakers or the exhibitors, is compelling. And I'm confident that CES 2025 is doing that through our robust keynote lineup. So I think in many ways, I think experiential standpoint, and I know that's a qualitative metric from my experience, but in some ways I was very lucky where my first CES got to be kind of that window right before and after. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great momentum for this show.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. So thanks again for your time. Brian, I'm sure you guys are, the whole organization's at a fever pace right now, getting ready for the show, and appreciate your insight, and hope you have a great show in Vegas as we kick off 2025.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right. Take care. Thanks.
Cheers.